I'm just going to do sort of logistical updates as folks continue to log on. Thank you so much for being here. This is the third of 3 reading group discussions of what works and doesn't, and we're so excited to have the authors here joining us. So you'll receive an email after today's event with the link to all of the recordings, as well as a link to an evaluation survey where you can complete that and receive the 3 CEU credits if you are a clinician, social worker, counseling. So that will come to you after the event. If you have any questions or want to reach out to us for further technical assistance or support, please don't hesitate to email ucjc@utah.edu. Thanks so much for joining us for this reading group.
So yes, as Jessica said, we are thrilled to have the authors here today. I'm also, I remember the first session we had of this where I came in thinking, I'm not sure I know what a reading group is. So I really enjoyed our time together. I thank all of you for coming back every week. I've loved hearing your experiences as you read the book and connecting that to your own work. Today, I am thrilled to, again, welcome the 3 authors of the text. And I just wanted to start by saying my first day in my job was a training on the CPC. I spent my first week of work with Debbie, which was amazing and mind-blowing and kind of like, oh my gosh. I've also had the opportunity to speak with and hear Dr. Latessa speak multiple times. Always learn something new and insightful. And though I have just met Dr. Johnson today, she has long been someone whose work and research I admire. And I was trying to think today, I think I might have read everything you've written, but I should check against your CV to see if that's true. But I've read a lot of it, of all 3 of you. So thank you so much for joining us. With that said, I'm going to do the introduction and then we'll get started. Dr. Latessa received his PhD from The Ohio State University and is, I believe, recently retired, correct? Director and professor of the School of Criminal Justice at the University of Cincinnati. Dr. Latessa has published over 175 works in the area of criminal justice, corrections, and juvenile justice, and has directed over 195 funded research projects, including studies of day reporting centers, juvenile justice programs, drug courts, prison programs, and intensive supervision programs, and he has received numerous awards. And at UCJC, we actually now have two staff who are graduates of the program, so I feel like we have benefited, or Derek, almost, sorry, I'm characterizing you inaccurately, but anyway, it's been exciting for us to have this connection to the University of Cincinnati. Shelly L Johnson, formerly List One, is a professor in the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. She received her PhD in criminal justice from the University of Cincinnati in 2001. She has also served on the faculty at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and Kent State University. She has extensive experience with evaluation research and best practices in corrections with both adults and youth. And finally, Deborah Koetzle is an associate professor in the Department of Criminal Justice and executive officer of the doctoral program in criminal justice at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, the Graduate Center, City University of New York. She received her PhD in criminal justice from the University of Cincinnati in 2006. Her research interests center on effective interventions, risk assessment, program implementation and fidelity, and cross-cultural comparisons of prison-based programs and practices. So welcome all. I sent the authors some of the questions you all have had and that we've discussed. So they've seen those, they have probably some responses to those, but I think it's probably more interesting to let you all have the opportunity to ask questions to start. I don't have anything formal planned. I do have questions always. I have my list of the questions I always want to ask Debbie during CPC training in the next program I assess. But I'd love to just give you all the opportunity to ask your questions and talk. Anyone want to go first?
Hi, Maddie Drury here. I'll start us off with a question. I really appreciated the book, read through it, marked it all up, and a lot of good information in here. So this is really good. I did have one question. As I read through the book, and one of the ongoing themes was the importance of staff and the role that they play influentially with the clients and making sure that we're hiring the right folks, and then training and coaching staff. One of my questions was, how do we get staff looking from short-term goals such as monitoring compliance to these long-term purposeful interactions, thinking long-term for the clients as well. What does that process look like?
I'm like, okay, so who's going to answer? We put on the process for who should answer first.
Sorry, I should have planned that.
No, that's fine. That's totally fine. And it's interesting because in classes you get used to the pregnant pause, right? You're willing to just let people pause and, see what happens. So, but I'm like, somebody answer. So first off, thank you for having us today. We're really excited to be able to be here and interact with you guys and spend this hour together. So really appreciate that. And I was curious if you could just maybe tell me a little bit more about your background to the person who asked the question. Is this in a probation setting, treatment?
Absolutely. So my name is Madison Drury. I'm the Salt Lake County Criminal Justice Services Program Manager for our probation misdemeanor unit. We, as a group, have been really focusing on making the shift from looking at compliance and monitoring to also incorporating long-term behavior change plan. This is through a number of things. We do bits and, courage to change journaling, as well as the use of EPICS tools with our team for the last 3 years or so. We've seen a lot of progress during implementation, as well as seeing this kind of cultural shift among staff. But still, of course, have kind of these lingering, training and maybe overall coaching concerns about, what can we really do as a management team, a leadership team, to really help facilitate our staff go from this kind of short-term, small office interaction to really making each one of these client interactions purposeful and meaningful in what the client's long-term goals are, right? And helping the clients to get there when maybe the clients don't know what those are. How do we also get the staff to approach each client interaction, with that same mindset?
So Madison, you mentioned that you're EPICS trained. And so I know that one of the, ideals in the EPICS model is to have that be part of the interaction with the clients. Is that something that your staff has been trained on but not really using, or would you feel like that model's been implemented well?
Yes, I mean, we have a lot of conversations about what the balanced approach looks like, right? Rewards and responses to behavior. Absolutely, we've been training, we've been coaching, we do, reviews of recordings, and supervisors are very involved with giving feedback. But, really just trying to think, what can we do for our staff to get them to that next level, right? To some of the things that you guys say in this book, right? And that's, like I said, one of the ongoing themes was just the importance of that relationship that the staff have each with the clients, right? And thinking if they play that impactful role, what can we do to, make that influence an even stronger influence?
Yeah, definitely. No, it's a great area, and I agree, an area in need of improvement in many jurisdictions, regardless of training and whatnot. One of the things I think I would start with suggesting is just, and I don't know exactly what you do already, but is to actually do quarterly or so audits on some of those goals, on some of those treatment plans or case plans that they're doing, and really kind of hold those then kind of quarterly sessions around, team building effort. Okay, how would you see this case? What are ways that we can improve that? Have that be like a group exercise, and have it so that every single person is required to kind of go through some of their case plans and goals and whatnot. So it doesn't look like you're singling out the one person who seems to be, maybe struggling more than another, and really get that group to give feedback to one another, to see themselves as, resources for each other. Ed or Debbie, anything else there?
Yeah, one of the things we've actually done it in Cincinnati and recently Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections was trained and adopted the process. It's kind of a building on the idea of a case review. It's almost like we took it from the medical model. It's like an autopsy. And so what you might do is you have a staff where a case goes bad, doesn't go the way you thought, right? They get rearrested or they commit a serious crime. We have that staff member present that case. Everything from the assessment to the case plan to what they did with the individual. And then as a group, we discuss it, right? And we talk about, did you have long-term goals? What happened? Maybe they did everything right. Often we find that they missed things. They didn't do a good enough assessment. And it's the person that's presenting the case to start thinking about moving beyond just compliance, right? What could they have done differently with this case? We don't do it in an adversarial way. We don't train them that way. It's really trained around trying to look at what happened and what could we have done differently. And so I think there are techniques. We talk a lot in chapter 12 about the importance of supervision and coaching. I don't think there's any substitute for that. Step out of this mindset of, everything's around compliance and the rules, and really getting them to think about behavior. How can they help this person change their behavior? Because at the end, if you can convince them that that's really the way to get public safety, I think we help push them away from this idea of the short term, follow the rules, to really helping this individual see how they can change their life. I hope it made some sense. I have a fog sometimes, so don't know if I'm always coherent.
Hey, no, that's great information. Thank you both.
Kristen, if we don't have volunteers, we're happy to go through some of those questions too that were raised, whatever you think is best.
Yeah, let's check in. Does anyone else have a question?
Hi. Yes, this is Gene Tabish. I'm a case manager in Salt Lake County. Does the panel have any suggestions for techniques besides ethics that case managers can use with their clients to help facilitate the coaching and that meeting and motivational interviewing that would help the client out as far as engaging in their own behavior change?
Hi, Jean. Thank you to all of you for joining us and for having us here. I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit more on, what you're interested in beyond ethics. I think ethics is sort of one model for delivering and using techniques like CBT, functional analysis, cost-benefit analysis, MI, and so forth. So are you thinking more about other techniques that can be used, or more a different model that could be used?
Not so much models, because ethics is great, and that's what our agency's been using. We also use BITS, brief intervention tools. I was thinking more along the lines to help techniques for maybe things to talk about with the client besides the behavior change plan. I mean, those are the plans that we set up are good, but sometimes it helps staff that may still be on the learning curve get an idea of what to focus on rather than going back to the default. Well, you have to drug test and the compliance. And,
Sure.
and does that help you?
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think, and I'll be curious what Shelley and Ed have to say. I think part of that is during those check-ins that you do as part of ethics is really listening to what the client is talking about in terms of the situations that they're facing and the challenges that they're struggling in addressing those situations. And so, I think that the behavior chains are sort of easy, and MI is sort of easy as a go-to for that intervention piece of ethics. But remembering all those skill building opportunities as well. And so perhaps working with staff to feel more comfortable in using some of the skill building cards, and thinking about how can we take a situation, identify what, if there's a skill deficit, what that is, and then how we can help teach that skill, practice it with them, assign that for homework, and so forth. But it sounds to me like that's maybe one piece that would be helpful. Shelley, I saw you nod. I don't know if you want to add to that. Oh, you're on mute.
I was going to say I saw Ed unmuted first, so I didn't know if he wanted to jump in real quick.
Yeah, a couple things. We know from the research we've done that there are some areas that staff really struggle with in some of the ethics model. All right, there's some things they do very well, other things that they really have some challenges with. We just had a dissertation done that looked at the difference between in-person coaching of staff versus the remote coaching of staff, which is what we usually do simply because we're not there on site. And this individual worked in Multnomah County, which is Portland, Oregon, and she was hired, and part of her job was to literally coach the staff, do in-person coaching, sit in on sessions and help them. And not surprising, what she found was that the in-person coaching was much more effective. I think giving staff as many tools, some of that is simply, again, reviewing what they did, how could they have done it differently, giving them, as Debbie said, skill cards and other things, giving them scenarios, because it is not an easy model for them to implement. And it does take a lot of work with the staff. So again, I think it's going to be coaching, identifying somebody in your agency that is really proficient at it, and making them a coach. The staff that are struggling more, because we can give them more tools, but again, client's different. They come in with a scenario, they come in with a situation, and you can't anticipate everything that you're going to hear. And so it's really getting the staff to be able to think on their feet, and be able to draw on their experience with them. So my advice would be to work in your agency to get some folks that are pretty good at it to help the staff that aren't proficient.
The other thing I would add too is just, to think about, if we know those core criminogenic needs, we know the assessment driven kind of process that's taking place. And so if you could have because you mentioned behavior chain, but one of the things that ethics doesn't do is script out, avoiding trouble with others, this is what you would do in this session, and script out behavior chain in this session, and so on and so forth. But the reality is you probably have staff having a few go-tos, right? A few social skills that they're comfortable using, that they like, a few behavior change situations that they're comfortable using, they like those as well, maybe even a cost benefit analysis. And so as you're training those new staff, in my opinion, it would be nice for them to have kind of a small, group of skills and activities that they know if the session's not going well, they can't get the person to talk, they don't really know what to do, then I can pull in one of these. But kind of as Ed said, obviously, you have to be nimble in the sense that what they're coming to the table with be completely different than what you plan to do during that particular meeting. But it's the opposite, I think, is what I hear you saying sometimes, which is how do we get them to know what to do if the client's really not forthcoming in the way we need them to be. Is that helpful at all?
I'm curious with this, how many of you in your agencies and organizations have the capacity to do a lot of coaching and feedback with staff. Is that something that happens a lot? Some of you are nodding. Addie, you do?
Well, in our therapeutic groups and in our one-on-one, I feel that it's we try to keep those lines of communication open at all times, like, here's my number if you need, for an emergency, etc. But I have found, I'm fairly new at Odyssey House, but I have found the treatment team being incredibly supportive if I have any kind of questions, and I have an incredible supervisor. And so I have felt completely supported in what I need to do. And also I've had other team members who are perhaps group leaders with, my clients also collaborate with me. So I am aware of what's going on when I'm not in their presence. And so I feel we do that fairly well.
Others? In my experience, I think, as we've done the CPC, and we've done it on, I think, some of your organizations, Odyssey House being one of them, that's something we see agencies struggle with, is how to bill for the time that is spent kind of doing that file review. So me looking at Addie's files, saying like, hey, here's what I'm seeing you are targeting, here's what I don't see you targeting, or observing you in group and giving you feedback specific to kind of this model. That's something I think from a system level needs to be addressed. And we honestly, with the Medicaid expansion, I think we've seen that even get a little bit more difficult, because clients before who were funded through public services, which had more flexibility, are now funded through Medicaid specifically. And so Medicaid ends up driving the case plans a lot in a way that it didn't used to, which has become substance abuse and not as much staff coaching and supervision. So
I want to also say that my director has come into my therapeutic group and visited and checked in on that. And she also regularly scans my reports and my files to say,
awesome.
You need to work on this and this, as you were saying.
Yeah, that's great. And Odyssey House you guys have a program, an internal quality assurance person as well, right, Misty? Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to sidetrack you. It's just a question that I often have. Other questions? As I mentioned, we did send some of the questions our group has been discussing to the authors, so they do have some responses to those. Those didn't, I know, cover the last 4 chapters because we hadn't gotten there yet. So if there's anything else from those last 4 chapters that you have questions about or thoughts about, definitely want to give you time to do that, to ask those.
I have a question. It's not necessarily maybe specific to those chapters, but this is Chris. I'm a supervisor with Salt Lake County Probation. I work with Maddie and Jean. We are in the process right now of reevaluating our case planning. We have a behavior change plan that is incorporated into our client database so that it is connected to the risk needs assessment that we apply, and then they can go from there to do the planning. But the one we built into the system is somewhat rigid. It has drop-down menus, and it doesn't give the case managers all the time the kind of leeway to be as responsive as they might like to be. And so I was just curious if any of you have any advice, or if there's anything that right off the top of your head that you think is absolutely like critical that should be in any case plan or any case planning format. There's something that should always be there, or that would help it be more of an effective tool.
Hi, Chris. Are you using the LSCMI, or what instrument are you using?
Yes, we're using the LSCMI, but we really only employ the first section.
Okay.
And then we have the behavior change plan that's in our database that we use with it. Yeah.
All right. I was just meeting with Heidi Kinney like
okay.
half an hour ago, I think so. And we talked a little bit about the BCP. I think one of the things is obviously case plans should be standardized in sort of the approach that you're taking, but they also need to be individualized. We've seen, I think speaking for Shelley and we've seen a lot of those sort of management information systems that have the automated case plan, and you've got the 8 options that you can choose from, and that's it. And there's not a lot of wiggle room. I'm not sure if that's exactly what your situation is, but it seems problematic for many reasons. You know, I think making sure that you're working with your team to develop case plans that are targeting obviously those higher need areas, but also really thinking more specifically about how responsivity works with those need areas, the ability to refer people for types of services, the other types of issues that they might need to have addressed, food insecurity, housing issues, transportation, language, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know if your management system is so rigid that it's not allowing for that, or allowing for sort of updating those case plans. I think it's sort of figuring out how do you have a parallel system that goes along with those to supplement that. I don't know if that exactly addresses what you're saying, and I'm sure Shelley and Ed have a lot to add on to that, but that's some of what Heidi and I were talking about just a bit ago. We're normally super talkative.
I know. I'm like, oh, we're playing a game of chicken there. When
I'm going to start calling on one of you. I'm going to be like,
I know, exactly. I think, I mean, unfortunately, I think the answer is if it's too rigid, then you have to supplement it. And people don't like hearing that, right? Is like, we can't fix a broken system. We have to find a way around it. But that's not the answer you probably want to hear in that regard. But yeah, if you have the option, I think one of the questions at the end, you asked of what should be in a system, right? And part of that, of course, is the ability to be flexible, and at the same time being able to measure things consistently. And so it is difficult, and that's where that's the reason I hesitated for waiting for Ed, was because I wasn't sure if he knew of a jurisdiction who has developed a really good case management system, because I don't tend to see them because they're difficult to and very expensive to create. So I think working within your parameters and then supplementing that with, you know, additional notes, whether I hate handwritten, so I wouldn't say that, right? Some Excel spreadsheet or some other way that you can analyze what's happening would be my recommendation. But I know that's kind of a recommendation.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Notice how Ed stayed quiet.
Chris, I'm curious, does your system currently let you track dosage? I know that's a conversation that a lot of, like, corrections right now is having a lot of conversations around dosage and how their system is so rigid it doesn't allow for that to be tracked, and it doesn't allow, like, people either complete or didn't complete treatment, but you don't know if they showed up on time, if they participated, if the treatment was run to death. You know what I mean? Like, kind of what counts and how do you count it?
Yeah, I mean, it is quite complex. They did a good job on giving us a lot of data points where we can pull that kind of information. However, and of course, we do supervise by risk and have standards per risk level so that we are providing the appropriate dosage. But yeah, there really isn't anything in the system where I could, like, look at a case manager and interaction with a client and determine how many hours or what have you they're spending and whether or not that was appropriate. Yeah, it doesn't do that part.
Yeah, that is something we've seen be hard to, that it kind of, the systems were designed to kind of implement the services, but not necessarily track them in the way that this model is kind of wanting you to do.
What we really need is to be partnered up with people that know how to design these systems and make sure that they get all of these different items in there. Because I think, I mean, every place that I've worked with has these same criticisms and these same challenges.
Mm-hmm. While we were waiting for someone else, I actually have a question I would love to ask. What does a good role play look like?
Have you ever seen the Mindy and Charles tape?
Oh, I was going to say Mindy and Charles. Yeah, I second that.
Yeah. There's a video we use for training on epics with a real client, and Mindy Schweitzer does a role play with him. You might, Derek, is Derek still on?
Yeah.
Yeah, you might want to have Derek. You might want to contact.
I actually have it, Ed. I can send it out. I can drop
Okay,
it.
well, they have it electronically, not on a CD. So.
Okay, I have it the YouTube link that works.
Okay, send them the YouTube link then. Yeah, send that to Kristen. that's really a great example. And she does the whole ethics model in less than about 13 minutes. And it's really an incredible, people watch it and they can't believe how much she gets done in that short a period of time. But it really shows a good role play. I happen to think you work from the client situation. You know, you have to make something up. They have enough things going on in their life that it's easy to create something, you know, where they say, in this case, his friend came over and wanted him to go out. It may be that, you know, something happens at work with his boss. And so you simply say to him, tell me what happened. All right, well, let's play that. One of the things you'll see in the video is Mindy always goes first. And that's because she wants to model and show him how to do it. And then she has him do the role play, right? Then they reverse it, right? So I think a good role play, you show the client what to do, they then do it, so they get the practice. And the reason's simple, we're always better when we practice something. It's a great example, but Shelley can go ahead and send that and you can distribute that to the group.
That would be great. So you touch on the second point of my question, which is this practice. So how do you make it harder? Right, it's supposed to get harder. How do you make the role play?
Well, you know, if you think about a situation you get into with a client, right, or they get into a situation, for example, their friend comes over and wants to go party with them, their friend doesn't just say, okay, you don't want to go, that's fine, right? And so you say, well, what if your friend says this, right? What if he does this, right? I mean, you have to, and again, you know, they may, in this case, the guy screwed up. He did go with his friend, right? So he did give in to the situation. And so what Mindy explores with them then is, well, how could you have done that differently? How could you, let's backtrack here, right? And so, you know, taking the situation, if they handled it well, then it's a success. But oftentimes they don't handle it well, in which case you're able to see what were the points where they could have made a different decision or they could have handled something different.
Yeah, and as you see people progress through treatment, you know, their high risk situations in the beginning typically are, like Ed said, just getting out of the situation. I got to just be able to figure out how to say no because I've never said no before. Then after they say no, you know, and it starts to create additional problems, then those become, you know, your advanced practice. But the reality is, like Ed said, if you're working with not only trying to come up with some hypotheticals for these clients, they don't need that. They have plenty of high-risk situations. And those high-risk situations should morph into things that are more challenging and difficult over time as they master some of those early social skills. Right. And so that should, in theory, be happening kind of naturally throughout the process, assuming your focus is on them, not on just creating hypotheticals. And even for people who are institutionalized, we find that they can, you know, we have that as well as they maintain different kind of roles within the institution, or start readying themselves for a reentry and having to talk to their mom again, or having to talk to that spouse again, or kids, or whatever the case may be. And so, yeah, I think it's starting small so that you can keep them motivated and getting them to believe, you know, having that self-efficacy, right? That's what we're ultimately trying to build with these skill sets, is self-efficacy. Is if I start small and I can build that self-efficacy of, okay, wait a minute, I can say no and I can get out of this. Now, how do we build on that? I sometimes see that the opposite is true, where we throw them to the wolves, right? And we expect them to be able to handle really complex situations out of the gate, you know, that involved family and long-term relationships and all kinds of issues, that it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. But step that back into something we can control, something we can manage, something we can feel that we can build that confidence around, and then kind of help them through that process later on in problem solving and so on.
Thank you. Anyone else? I think if someone else has a question, I definitely want to give you the opportunity to ask. I think we can also go to some of the ones that were sent. Okay, maybe we'll You want to raise your hand if at some point you have a question as we're talking, but in the meantime, maybe let's go to some of the ones that we sent out, which are based on the discussions we've been having. That work? Gary, you're the one in my line of sight right now. Are you nodding? Okay. So yeah, I think if you guys want to talk, I can pull those up.
So I've got them here as well. And the first one, I think very relevant to COVID. Do you have any ideas for integrating behavior management techniques into a telehealth setting beyond the verbal responses? This is tough, right? When we're talking about remote supervision. And I guess I'd be curious to start by asking, are you doing video? Are you doing phone? And how have you sort of been addressing this? Do you have a behavior management system in place? Do you have a token economy system in place? I have some ideas. I've been doing some work around the area of video, but I'd be curious to hear what you're all doing. Are you doing remote supervision? Remote engagement? Yeah. By video or by phone? Both. Okay. Okay. You know, there's not a lot of research on doing reinforcement, using punishers remotely. This is obviously an emerging area. There is research in the area of telehealth and working with other populations. I would say first, the same principles apply, right? We still want to reinforce use reinforcers over punishers. We want to be as immediate as possible. We want to be targeting those behaviors that we're trying to change or stop. One of the areas in telehealth that looks to be quite successful is the use of tokens, and doing digital tokens in particular. That's a long-term solution, but I am hopeful that this is something that COVID will sort of spur in corrections, is how to start using digital tokens that then you know, have that symbolic value in addition to the verbal praise. There's an app out that right now is targeted for juveniles called the OCT app. It's published by My New Leaf. I met with them a few months ago, well, I guess about 6 months ago now, and it ultimately will integrate with your case management system. And so the idea is that you as a supervision officer or as a case manager could sort of see when they're updating their goals, when they're making progress towards their goals. They can earn credits for making progress and reporting on this, and then you can get feedback. And so it's a pretty sophisticated system. It's been implemented, it's been tested up in Tacoma, Washington, and I think a couple of other sites. I don't know where they are in terms of fully rolling it out, but I sort of think that that's where we're going to have to go if we really want to start doing reinforcement remotely. That's a long-term solution. I don't have any good answers short-term other than making sure that you're really thinking about the general principles of reinforcement. But I don't know if Shelley and Ed have some more sort of immediate fixes there. I don't think we know enough yet other than the general principles.
No, I think it's a whole new world. I think you have to do a lot of verbal reinforcement and, you know, effective disapproval if the client's, you know, doing what they're supposed to do. Debbie's right. We get these tokens, or you get you know, badges. If you play a video game, you get badges and things like that. That whole world's just starting here. I think you know, it's the best, you do the best you can using the reinforcers you can. You can still do, you know, if you're doing a group virtually, you can still do a client of the week. You can still do, you know, have them earn points, things like that. That might be able to, they may be able to exchange for other reinforcers, but there's no, you know, there's no roadmap here for doing this. This is a whole new world for everyone, doing things virtually.
I would say, and we don't have research around this, so this is just purely speculation on my part. We have a little bit of data around this. I would say I would encourage you to use video when possible. One of my colleagues and I are doing some work, and we found that when remote supervision is done through video, people are reporting using more behavioral types of techniques and working with individuals versus using phone or texting. And so I don't know yet how that translates exactly into reinforcement and punishers, but it does look like it facilitates the use of more behavioral and treatment-oriented techniques. It looks like my video is lagging as I'm talking about using video, so that's pretty ironic.
I was just going to say, that's a funny, given, yeah, your video's lagging. I mean, I think,
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny because even like this, webinar, the impersonal nature of video makes it so much more, so much more difficult to manage. And now my dog's barking. So it's even more of an indication of the problems with video, right?
Do you want me to read the next question?
There's also a question, I think, related to this one, Debbie. We've had some difficulty finding ways to reinforce camera usage, consequences for not using camera in our telehealth groups, other than bringing it up infrequently. Or frequently, sorry, not infrequently. So I think it's just a comment.
Yeah, I don't have a good, we haven't encountered that yet. I should say we're doing, again, ironic that I'm going to stop my video. No irony there. We're starting a series of focus groups in the spring, Craig Schwalbe and I, or actually in January, where we're going to do 4 to 6 focus groups of individuals using video conferencing specifically, and asking how do you use core correctional practices and so forth within a video environment. And so these will be some of the issues that we'll be asking about, but I see the chat, maybe get credit for having their camera on. That's a great idea. I think the same general principles apply, but we need a lot more research in this area.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, I mean, I think whenever we talk about compliance issues, is linking rewards to the issue of compliance is something we don't think about. Most of the time it is around consequences for not doing it. How about a reward for doing it? Everybody who keeps their camera on gets an incentive for doing so. Yeah, I agree. That's a great suggestion.
Do you want me just to read the next question? So one of the questions, one of the questions was suggestions for using punishers, or what is a punisher in an outpatient treatment setting when the therapist does not have a way to sanction a client. So sort of the opposite side.
Yeah, I'll jump in on this. I've gotten this question quite a bit from treatment providers who, they feel like they can't do the things that a probation officer can do. And let me first say that I'm not sure that that's your role. I think here you're using we'll use the word negative reinforcer to help shape their behavior in the group, right? And so again, effective disapproval, talking with the client after the group about their behavior and what they need to do to remedy it, things like that. If the client is not showing up, if the client is, being totally disrespectful, then I think you talk to the probation officer, the parole officer. I think it's not necessarily your role to use those, those sanctions that the system has available. I think you have to use more of the, the behavioral strategies that you would have available to you. If the client simply isn't showing up, isn't doing anything, then you call the probation officer. And you talk to them about how you and that probation officer can help get this client in compliance. Remember, a lot of the sanctions they use don't work very well either. So I'm not sure that if you had them available to you, they would make a whole lot of difference.
Shelley, do you want to add to that?
No, I agree with that. You know, I think that covers it. I was answering as part of the chat too.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm seeing lots of comments in the chat about the use of cameras and phones and so forth. And these are tough options, right? Because or tough issues. There's data issues, bandwidth issues, the cost. Some people might have phones but not have the data. What we're finding in New York City is that juveniles are more likely to have access to video conferencing versus adults, and that's because the schools gave all the kids tablets for school when we went remote. So a lot of complicated issues around that video supervision. But I think, again, when we can, we should be focusing on that for remote. So the next question was, or comment was asking for suggestions for providing treatment when you have only access to the total score from the risk assessment and not domain scores or more detail. I don't know, Shelley, do you want to? I'm just going to start throwing us to the wolves.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, I think that, you know, I think that's not necessarily uncommon for a treatment provider to not have that. I'm assuming that came from someone maybe in the treatment side of things versus probation who's probably administering it. You know, my first suggestion, of course, would be you need to get the full assessment, right? So that would always be my first gut reaction, is that's something that should be coordinated with the people doing the assessments and making sure you get it. So that's the overall long-term plan. The short term, if you don't have access to it immediately, would be certainly not conducting a full-on interview, but focusing in on this key core criminogenic issues and trying to figure out what's going on there. So, hey, I don't necessarily have this assessment in front of me. Can you tell me about who you hang around with? Who are your peers? Who is your support system? Tell me a little bit about your family, right? Make it that kind of general kind of interview to try to get that background information on them around the core group of criminogenic needs. But long term, you got to plan to get that full assessment.
All right.
That, I think,
go ahead.
sorry, I think it's something I know the state, that's been an ongoing struggle for treatment providers, getting those assessments from the correctional. It's probably different in different areas of the state, but it has resulted in, for instance, the division purchasing LSI screening versions for treatment providers, which again, then you have another kind of strange thing where you have two different assets, like even if they're the same in content, they're done by different people. So let's see, comment.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, and again, those assessments are supposed to be something that changes over time too. And so we also have to kind of think about, okay, is this treatment provider in a position where they could do a reassessment, even if it's a short one? Have they been trained on the tool to that extent where they could actually, you know, conduct those assessments, particularly for those high risk cases where they want to really dig deep into what's happening? Because ideally, I think, you know, with the LSI, I know they say 6 to 9 months, maybe a year for reassessment. And so I recognize for the most part, reassessment in that context would be a longer period of time. But if we're talking about just trying to get the basic information, what can they do there? How can they get that information? Particularly with the LSI, I mean, if we think about that, that's a great tool, but it truly is only scratching the surface of those criminogenic needs, right? So when we look at peers, you're only talking about having, you know, 4 questions related to peers. And so that doesn't really give us the even if they have the subcomponent score, that wouldn't give us the detail that we really want to know about them. And so that secondary interview, getting to know them, developing that case plan with them, really should provide that additional detail, even if they don't have the subcomponent score too.
Great. Any other questions related to that or comments?
I can make a quick comment about why that might be happening, because we used to do that. We would give it to the clinicians who conducted the ASAM assessments for our clients in our intensive supervision program. And it was incredibly helpful, but we ran into some sort of legal roadblock where there was copyright issues about distributing that assessment. And so what we did as a workaround, we did create a document that basically it had essentially a bar graph on it that would rate the different criminogenic areas from highest to lowest needs. And so we were able to share that information with them. So they would have a little bit more information than the score. They wouldn't be able to see the entire assessment, of course, but they would get at least the rating of the criminogenic needs that they had and then their overall score.
And that's what I've heard as well, that it's a legal issue that due to copyright, that lawyers have interpreted from an agency perspective that those can't be shared with someone who doesn't have their own license.
Right, but I think that's a good workaround. You don't have to share the entire assessment. You can say these are the areas they're high in, these are the area that they're low in, right? I mean, without giving them that assessment, you certainly, you know, when there's that handoff of that case, I think that's important. When that PO is referred to treatment, they say that they discuss, here's what we know about this individual. They don't have to necessarily give them the form, but it's very difficult to target areas if you're not sure what the areas are to target. So I think that's something that you have to think about and work through. It's not uncommon. It happens in other places, and usually they figure out a workaround on it without violating anybody's legal rights.
So I guess related to the issue of assessment, there was another question about measuring and assessing criminal thinking. And so,
let me take this one, Debbie. Yeah, I think first is it depends on whether you're doing a group or whether you're working with an individual. If you're doing a group work, there are tools that can assess criminal thinking. There's a number of them out there. I don't know if we list them in the book or not, but Texas Christian University's Institute for Behavioral Research has some tools. There's How I Think, there's PICS, there's a number of instruments. And so those can be administered as almost a pre and post test. You can give it to the client before the group and give it to the client after so many sessions. So if you're doing a group, those are tools you can use. If you're talking about individual work with someone and you haven't done the assessment and you want to try to gauge or assess their criminal thinking, I think there's some things you do. First, you do a brief interview and you explore their views about their behavior, about their role, their victims, their friendships, their substance abuse. You simply ask them, tell me about it, right? And if you hear a lot of minimizations, if you hear a lot of denials of responsibility, I always say the word that you listen for is but, B-U-T. So if they say, yeah, I did it, but, all right, now you're about to hear a minimization. You're about to hear them come up with some excuse, right? How do they feel about what happened to them? Do they feel it was fair? Do they feel that they got the right, that the PO's fair, that the judge was fair? These are things that you listen for and you explore. I always say that even though you may know what they're there for, you might start by asking them, tell me about why you're here. Tell me about what happened. And listen to them, right? Do they accept responsibility? Right? Do they blame the booze? Do they blame the drugs? Do they blame their family? Right? If you hear that, what you're hearing is something actually to work with. Right? The good news is they're making excuses, but there's some guilt there. Right? You've got something to latch on to. That's much better than someone that says, "Yeah, I did it and I do it again." All right? Now you're dealing with someone who's going to be a lot more difficult to get through to.
And there was a comment in the chat from Lewis. I'm not sure that I'm reading this right. I'm interested in rehearing about giving less to the courts in assessments and evaluations. Lewis, can you tell us a little bit more about what you're asking there? Oops, I think your mute is on. All right. I can't.
I can't.
Yeah, I can't hear him.
Lewis, are you still here?
Okay, now there we go. Okay, he was talking about me and technology, right? I was muted. So I caught the wave. Thanks for the smile. It made it easier. Anyway, he was talking about getting less in terms of, I guess, risk and needs. And I'm trying to wrap my brain around that a little bit better. I've done some assessments where I only give a recommendation, and sometimes I think that that's probably more ethical. But then sometimes I send the whole evaluation. So it caught my attention.
All right. I don't know if I think maybe I'm having some audio difficulties and didn't quite hear all of that. I don't know, Christian, did you?
It cut out. Lewis, you cut out. You might want to see if it's in the chat. Yeah, he's saying his signal is iffy. We have about 4 minutes left. So Lewis, if you want to try to put it in the chat.
I'm also going to share a link to the recently released, it's an addendum to the JRI audit, which is information sharing in the criminal justice system. I think that's come up today, and it comes up a lot for us during CPCs of how to access these assessments between stakeholders. So I'm just going to link that in the chat for folks if they want to read more.
And Lewis says just what the presenter author said about sharing more or less information. It sounds like he has a question of whether it's better to share more or less having done assessments. Is that correct, Lewis? Thank you, Shelley. It sounds like he's having problems hearing too, so I think it's what Ed was talking about sharing information, but Lewis was also not hearing well. So we will, as Jessica said, post this. So Lewis, you will be able to hear Dr. Latessa's response. I know we're winding down now. We only have 3 minutes left. I want to thank you all so much for coming. If this means coming. It's exciting to me to have a chance to ask the authors all my questions. I was good about holding back because I have a whole list of questions here. But
I was going to say, that's too bad we didn't get through very many, but that's great. Maybe another time.
I think it's so great. I mean, I think for me, just listening to all you talk, I mean, even though I've been trained, I've read the material, I'm like, wait a minute, why didn't I think of that? So I think, for example, staffing cases according to a medical model, that's a great idea. It's not something I'd heard of. So always excited to hear from you all. And if anyone else has any other final thoughts, I think we'll let us all go. Does anyone else have anything they want to say? Ask?
No, I just want to say I enjoyed the session, enjoyed seeing everyone. I hope everyone has a great December and holiday if you celebrate Christmas, and good luck with your work. And if you need anything, just write Debbie or Shelley.
Actually, that's fine. So I don't mind. You recommend that. Yeah, thank you too. It was great meeting everybody, at least virtually. Like I said, but for those of you who weren't on, Debbie speaks very highly of you. So onward with your good work.
Thank you for having us. It's nice to see so many familiar faces, and looking forward to being able to actually go to Utah and be there in person again someday in 2021.
That would be great. Love to see all of you. And Jessica, can we send out the link to the role play too in our email?
Most definitely. We'll round up all the resources that were shared in the chat and make sure you all have access to those.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.